Hello, everybody. Here we are in Belgrade for another very special episode of my podcast. And today I have the privilege to sit right next to my dear friend Natasha Bites, somebody that I've known probably like
close
you're
to 10
one
years.
of one of my oldest friends, I think, from LA.
Yeah.
And she's an architect. She's been an architect much longer than I have. She's taught architecture. She's one of the most creative people I know. She's ventured into many other creative fields. And we've already started, actually, the conversation. But let me pick it up from where I actually wanted to. And I think that today is really special because we're sitting in Belgrade, a place where we're both from, and that surely had an impact on both of us.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's a beautiful city. It's one of the oldest cities in the world and in Europe. So Natasha, how long have you been here? I'm so happy that we're here.
Yeah, it's true.
After all this time, I haven't seen you.
Yeah.
It's been COVID, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And here we are in Belgrade.
Yeah.
So tell me, how do you feel here? How do you feel being in Belgrade?
I love Belgrade's vibe. So there's vibrancy that I think sustained me while I was growing up. And there were kind of ups and downs in Belgrade, but I can feel it now again. So you can feel the vibrancy, you can see that there's new generations coming in, there's a lot of new stuff happening, and a lot of really creative stuff happening. So I really love being back here.
I love that. Actually, I want to say a few words about your outfit today.
Oh, thank you.
Natasha made her own dress, which doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Natasha makes all kinds of things. You're also a great cook.
Thank you, yes.
It doesn't stop at architecture.
No,
so
totally.
tell me more about like.
I will have a full line of dresses with a friend from Belgrade that I will sign, because I've been doing that forever, and my interest is in topology. You have a flat piece of fabric and you need to wrap up something three-dimensional. I think it's architecture, but just not spatial, right?
Yeah.
So I've been exploring it for a long time. And I love a whole lot of sensory stuff, so cooking, perfumes. What else? I mean, I grow my own.
I mean, just your persona.
Yeah.
I think like when somebody like sees you, like I think they already know this woman is like in the creative space.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But that actually reminds me. A while ago, I used to work at Fred Fisher.
Yep.
And you
that
came and you gave us a presentation about a project that you were working on. But then you made us lunch.
Yes, I did. Do you remember that? Yeah.
And I thought that was just
that was completely
amazing and cool.
inspired.
Yeah.
Because I think that those two kind of cultures, Ottolenghi draws a lot from Californian, but it kind of puts Middle Eastern influences. And here we are at the crossroads.
Yeah.
Works perfectly.
Yeah, but I think it also speaks to being from Serbia, there's something about feeding people.
Oh,
too.
yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. So it's culture of being, how do you invite being welcomed, right? And how do you share that? And how do you share care? And how do you share a whole lot of stuff? So I do cook, and I cook.
I was just so like, first of all, I was so surprised, but then I was also touched because it was definitely something from our culture.
Yes.
But then what that said to me, this woman can do it all.
Oh, thank you.
She didn't just like make this amazing. It was so inspirational, I think, at the time, and we'll talk more about that.
Yeah.
I think that was the beginning of your interest in AI, and we'll focus on that later.
It was. Yes.
Like I think intellectually we were all blown away, and at Fred Fisher, like it's a pretty high margin.
Oh, it is very high margin.
And then at the same time, this woman, you didn't go buy lunch. Like,
no, I brought it.
You made it.
I made it.
And it was just such a great gesture.
Oh,
and I was
I'm
just
so
like
glad.
Blown away.
I was really, really pleased when, the staff that was not on a meeting asked if they can have some. And then I got a book from the office that is called Delight.
Oh yeah,
And
that's
I
Fred's
was,
book.
I, it was
It-
just,
it's
it
cool.
was,
Yeah.
it was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
So there's conversation, there's verbal conversation, there's non-verbal conversation, and then there's these conversations that go on through book, through food, through all this other stuff. And I think
love
it's
that.
fabulous.
I really love that about you, and I think it goes back to architecture because
does.
isn't architecture taking care
Oh
of
yes,
people?
I think definition of design is taking care. So I teach students that there are three verbs that we use interchangeably. Well, actually, they're not all verbs, but we can use them as verbs. So style, language, and design. And when we talk about things, we sometimes mean style, but we say design. When we talk about language, we usually use style, but we mean language, meaning the elements are carried through floor, carried through ceiling, carried through everything. But design is what actually connects all of them. So design is care. Design means the language makes sense, and the use makes sense, and the style is appropriate. And you can shift multiple styles in the same outfit with the same, add-ons in architecture, in fashion, in perfumes. In perfumes, you do it all the time because you have the top notes, you have these other notes, and you're trying to kick a bigger story.
Right. Yeah. It
Kind of
carries through.
non-linear weaving of multiple ideas.
I love that. I
and
really
and
love
that's
that.
and then that's what architecture should be. That's what design should be. That's what style should be. And that I think boils down onto care.
Absolutely. And what I love about you is that you carry it through so many different aspects of your life, professionally, personally. I think to me, you are somebody that really kind of lives and breathes this thing, whether it's architecture or design or whatever you want to
So here's my explanation. You have different type of thinkers. I am an abstract thinker, meaning I lift everything up to abstraction. I got a lot of math when I was growing up, so math is an abstract language. So I can boil it down to something abstract, and
I wasn't a fan of that.
hey,
wasn't, but
that
good
is
for you.
completely okay. But that's how it happened to
Yeah,
me.
absolutely.
So when I design a salad, I have similar principles to when I design a dress, to when I design a space.
Yeah.
So there has to be use, there has to be kick, there has to be surprise, there has to be a little bit of awe, right?
A little bit of delight.
And a delight,
Yeah.
yes. And then it needs to be weaved into something that is comprehensive, and that is care.
I love that. I love that. Actually, it really reminds me of. So a while ago, I went to the Eames house in the Palisades,
Oh, yes,
and there
yes,
was an
yes.
event
Yes,
there.
yes,
And Eames Demetrios, who became a friend of mine actually,
Yeah.
and my dad and him are friends too.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah, my dad, who lives in Basel, took him to the Vitra Museum, and there's a lot of Eames stuff there, and they totally kicked it off.
Yeah.
Eames is actually another guest of
That is
the show.
fantastic.
And he said something that really stayed with me. So Ray and Charles Eames, who we know are one of the most iconic designers ever,
Yes.
that brought us into modernity
Yes.
in some ways,
Yes.
talked about design, or being a good designer is similar to being a good host.
Oh, yeah.
You have to kind of bring the people in and show
Absolutely.
them,
Yep.
so I kind of see that similarity.
So, they're actually a generation that realized that architecture is about people. That we are losing a little bit because we also had a middle period where statistics were standing in for people. And I think we are
That's
getting
interesting.
out of it, right? So if you remember Rem Koolhaas's earlier work, it was always statistics. He would always say, well,
He was more like a journalist to me.
that is interesting. I think he's a storyteller.
He is a journalist. I think that's how he started. I could
possibly.
be.
No, quite possibly.
We
but
can
it's just-
Google it later.
We know, we can Google it later. Quite possibly, but the style that he has, or he had at that point, because we're all growing out of a lot of ideas, and these are incredibly exciting times. So we change a lot. Even Frank Gehry changed his language. When you look at the latest Frank Gehry and the early Frank Gehry,
Oh, yeah.
these are very different things. So
Ooh,
we are
that's a
growing
great-
out of we are growing out of a lot of things, but the world is changing around us. When I started architecture, oops, there was, a mic. There were no cell phones. My first hotel designs, you had to put in a phone in every room.
Booth. Or
phone in every room, right?
Yeah.
So the world is really changing. And what is interesting about EAMS is they introduced a lot of ideas. What I like about it is that Ray's kind of listed on projects, which is really, that's another question of domesticity, women in architecture,
I think
hats
actually,
and all of that.
maybe she was the dominant designer even.
Well, then we should say Ray Eames, not Charles and Ray, right?
Ray
But
and
we
Charles
don't.
Eames.
Well,
Charles and Ray
you're
Eames,
right, right?
you know?
You're right.
It's Ray and Charles Eames.
Yeah, I think that's the way it could
Yeah.
possibly go.
No, but I
anyways.
think they're interesting. Why? Because we live in LA, right? We're here in Belgrade now, and we should go back to that.
Yeah. Look at the view.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
But like before them, and I think that to myself a lot driving around LA, is that people lived in kind of like it was a slightly medieval even like aesthetic before them. Like
Yes.
things that you touched, that you saw.
Yes.
Were different back
Yes.
then.
Yes.
There was a lot of decoration. There
Yes.
was a lot of stuff.
Yep.
And they had this completely original, I would say revolutionary even, if I may say so, kind of view of what things could be and how we could live our life.
So I will compare it to Coco Chanel because what we think of Chanel today, post Lagerfeld, post everything, is a luxury brand. What she started doing is she started making dresses out of jersey.
Yes.
Jersey is underwear.
I mean, before her, it was all like Victorian
Completely,
hats and
right?
like feathers, and
Yeah.
she shortened the skirt.
and made it out of
And look at-
really inexpensive materials. So
But made
her
it beautiful.
approach, well, it was. I'm quite sure that it was shocking. Not in Schiaparelli, whatever. However, oh my God, it's my pronunciation going to go crazy. In these the Poiret, the Lanvin, and all these other fashion houses, they were always couture. Chanel was.
Oh, she democratized it, you mean?
I think in a way democratized also went for shock, right? Went for well, let me show you this underwear material. Look what I can do. So when Charles and Reims make their house, they go and buy stuff, right, and
yeah.
assemble it and
Yeah.
say, look, technology is doing a whole lot of wonderful stuff. We don't have to custom make it. We can assemble it. And that's a whole other approach, I think,
I love
in terms
that,
of
actually.
in the idea of authorship, right? So this is the idea of authorship that is an assembler and not the author that starts from a divine inspiration and does stuff.
I think
And that's the
yeah.
shift. And
Yeah.
this is, goes back to.
Do you think we've done that in architecture?
Well,
I don't think so, personally.
There's this. Is it Adorno or one of these early, really communist writers? The work of art in the age of mass production. Boy,
Yeah.
no, it's Benjamin or Adorno. Doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
yeah.
So we of course we go back to philosophy, right?
Yeah.
So the question is where are we on the market, and what are our clients looking for?
Yeah.
And what they want is not mass production. They want one-offs, and I think the Guggenheim Bilbao effect
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
kind of resurrects the city plays a role, which is interesting. And starchitects as a construct play a role.
Yeah.
But
To kind
we are
of
talking
move
about
and try to evolve
Right.
everybody behind it. But actually, before this and before we started filming, we kind of started that conversation whether you needed to be a starchitect to be an architect, and what does it mean to be an architect. And I think that a lot of people going into architecture these days, a lot of young people, think they're going to become architects and they're going to become starchitects and they're going to
Absolutely.
change the world.
Yes.
And they're going to create a paradigm shift.
Oh, absolutely.
But isn't there something, and I think that I would say that I'm trying to do that in my practice, is try to make extraordinary and timeless designs without a lot of pomp and not a lot of noise, using just regular materials. Why can't there be cool design for everybody? Like, so, you know, everybody meaning like not whoever commissioned the Bilbao, you know, like not an institution or a billionaire, but like a middle class family in America that can like do something cool.
This is my
with
favorite
materials, with materials from the frickin' Home Depot.
Oh, absolutely.
Listen, in
So-
America, we build things with studs and stucco
Oh,
and
absolutely.
chipboard.
Oh,
Why
absolutely.
can't there be
And
something
we faked
cool?
them, and we faked them like Cal framing. That was always to me the standard of LA roofing, right? You do Cal frame, you do one frame, and then you do whatever you want on top of it.
Yeah, but can it not be fake also? Can we
Does-
be
does not-
honest about it?
Well, the question is now, so it goes back to Shakespeare, right?
Ah.
When you think about, so to me, that's the paradigm. So Shakespeare always had everything. It's a bit of drama, there's kissing, there is sword fight, there is comedy even in tragedy.
Yes.
So his audience...
Which is life, right?
Which is life, right? So his audience had to be incredibly broad. And because it's not just ionic pentaton, the style of rhyme that ionic pentameter, right?
Uh-huh.
That's how he rhymes. Leaves a lot of space for interpretation. And we are still doing Shakespeare. There's been a few centuries, and a lot of other people studied the problems of a young prince and whatever.
Well,
but we are still
issues are timeless. And
They
the
are.
architecture
They
should
are.
be timeless in some
They
ways,
are.
right?
They are, right? So when you ask some of the famous architects what their favorite building is, they will go into a Pantheon in Rome,
Ah,
which is really interesting, right?
huh.
Right? So where we are, I think there's a little bit of a shift, especially like with the last two Pritzker prizes, and this whole shift from, and then you kind of generations that are younger than us that have that shift.
That are sort of quietly doing something. I've noticed that too.
Right.
I think it was a pair of women recently.
Oh,
that
they
got
were.
the-
There was a pair of Irish women, and
Yes.
I'm gonna kind of mess their names now.
Yeah, I mean nobody knows them. Like, let's be honest.
From-
Like, no
yeah,
one
they're
knows
not-
them, right?
they're not
They're
architects.
not Zaha Hadid with
Right.
like, you know, futuristic
The diva
swirls,
personality and
you know,
everything else.
like,
Yes,
that
and shoes and
make,
everything.
billion-dollar developments in Arab countries. I mean, right?
Well, I mean, she did a well.
I sound super crude, and I apologize.
I think she was absolutely appropriate for the times. And,
No, I admire
and
her.
think-
I mean, she's a woman, but she's also a very privileged woman. She's
oh
not
yes,
any
absolutely,
woman.
yeah.
You know.
So, which
Her
kind of brings
father-
us back to
yeah.
us, because both of us grew up in Belgrade, but you know,
So here and there for me.
but not kind of there's Belgrade and Belgrade and Belgrade, and
And we grew up in the Belgrade. But
yes.
let's get back to Belgrade.
Yeah, let's go back to Belgrade.
Skip
Yeah.
whatever. We
yeah,
were
I
talking
mean, look
about
at this view, and then you start looking at these buildings, and you start seeing that this is really a brutalist capital of the world, and there was Belgrade School,
which is very in, right?
It is really in. I think we are rediscovering a lot about past. There was this incredible exhibition actually staged by a friend of mine in MoMA about architecture of Yugoslavia, and because it was so well presented, finally there's enough material so that it could be studied. And that's again the question of saliency, right? What is visible, right? If it's not visible, if there's not enough material, well, it could be fantastic. Like, how much do you know about Yemen? Yemen is, I've been seeing these Yemeni towns forever, and they're unbelievable. They're now, I think, completely scrambled because it's been a war going on for several years. Everything is bombed and whatever forces. But they had these mud, Manhattan-like cities from 13th century on. There's not enough material. Neither of us are inspired by Yemen.
Yeah.
We should be, but there's really not enough saliency, so it's not forward.
I mean, you know a lot about Belgrade. You've studied architecture in
Here.
the city. you know a lot of architects. My daughter was playing with me, interviewing me last night at dinner, knowing that we would have this interview. And she asked me, how many architects did you meet while you lived here? And I didn't meet any architects. I just perceived this city through my own experience, just living here as a civilian. As a civilian, not an architect. So I don't really know a lot about the architect. I can just tell you what my perceptions are, and it has to do with scale and just my experience, right? My memories, my personal life here. Right. And even growing up, I didn't completely grow up in Belgrade. I should say that. But we're here on a vacation, and we were recently in Paris, and we were talking about what's all of these beautiful classical buildings in Paris. There's so many of them, and my mom and I were also discussing it. Our city has been ravaged. We're here at the crossroads of many different civilizations, and it
hasn't been ravaged once. It's been ravaged every 30, 40 years.
During World War II, we were bombed twice. We were bombed recently in 99.
Yep.
So it's very hard. Cities are built over centuries.
Yes.
And we have these great European nations that have a colonial history, that have been accumulating wealth and building, and you can totally see that. And our city has been just sort of demolished over and over and over again.
Yes.
But you said something beautiful.
Periods of. I think volatility is in. It's going to stay in. But Belgrade really experienced volatility. First World War, Second World War, Balkan Wars, 99. Dear God, right? We didn't miss much.
Ottomans for 500 years.
I mean, we did not miss much. But during the nice lulls in history, we were able to develop stuff. So out of necessity and out of really relying on our own forces, there was a school of thought in architecture, Belgrade School. So we were probably not great in theaters, not great in operas, no opera. I mean,
there's the National Theater.
National Theater, right? But it's 18-something building design, right? It's completely different, right? However, what was needed was apartments. And I think in a decade or two, the core of brutalist utilitarian expression set in. So nobody packs an apartment like Belgrade School. So in 75 square meters, 750 square feet, you can pack a really nice 2 to 3 bedroom.
And there will be multiple generations, right?
Multiple generations, and you will have space for skis, and for summer clothes, and for winter clothes, and for...
and you'll have a balcony.
You will have a balcony.
And maybe a view.
Hopefully some view, but it will be green, hopefully, right? And then you will have your rosemary and basil, so that you can make your own preserves. Again, that's the culture. And when you look at it, there's no extras, right? It is bare bones, very lean, incredibly down to earth.
Okay.
But it works.
Why don't you compare that, now we both live in LA, right? And, I live with my daughter in a 3-bedroom house, right?
Of course.
And I have a 2-car garage.
Of course.
Can you compare and contrast, and maybe, there's some lessons here that we could take into LA.
So there's a huge difference in underlying philosophy. The way I was brought up through dialectics, right? The communism was great, but Hegelian dialectics, meaning you look at a contrast. You just told me contrast, right? I was taught biology through contrasting. You start for a single cell organism, you go to multiple cell organisms. I think the underlying US, or maybe the dominant US philosophy is libertarian, which is a
do whatever the hell you want. Do whatever the hell you want. Right?
No, exactly. So just don't die on my doorstep.
Yeah, don't die. Don't kill somebody.
Yeah,
you're good.
But I'm not going to invest in anything communal because what I'm interested in is me, and I'm not interested in you as long as you don't disturb me.
Okay.
Look at this density. You have to be interested in who your neighbors are because they affect you. right? So you either find the language or not. If you do, fabulous.
Actually,
if you
that's a great topic because we're just exiting this like COVID like isolation. We've all lived in our little boxes.
Yep.
And now we almost have to relearn how to be with other people.
Yes.
Like we're coming out, but it's not the same. It's
No,
like
it's not.
you can't just be like, "Hey, I like your dress. Like, you want to have
and
a
everybody's
cup of
a little bit
coffee?"
kind of,
Like,
oh yeah, okay, yeah. Well,
yeah, it's
whatever,
kind of
right?
weird, right?
It is weird. And the big shift that happened is the city's emptied out, right?
Yeah.
The city's emptied out. Office buildings. I remember I was working with a startup, and we were kind of looking into kind of working with the French company because they did a sensor that we needed, and we were talking to them, and all of them left Paris, and they were saying La Défense is empty, and it's probably going to stay empty for another zillion years. Right? I don't know what is going on right now. It's been a year and a half, but it was really interesting. So when we all had to redraw, everybody was looking for their own garden, their own territory. That is defensible.
Where they can retreat.
Where we
Their
can
own
retreat.
box.
Exactly. And I think, when you think about LA
But
and
do you
the urban
think-
sprawl, that's been there forever, right? So we are trying to densify Wilshire. I know that you're going to speak to Tom Main. He's been doing densification of Wilshire for, I met him. We were teaching at UCLA together. Well, I was not teaching with
SciArc
him.
also, right?
Well, yes, he was not at SciArc that much when I was at SciArc. I was in SciArc, it's kind of embarrassing to say how many years ago, over 25.
Let's just say 2 years ago.
Yeah, let's call it 2 years.
Before COVID.
Before COVID, right? We were at UCLA, I was at UCLA 2015, 16, somewhere around there, and he was teaching at UCLA, and then he left for SciArc. And this idea of just densifying a corridor that can have communal transport, that can have mixed use around Wilshire.
Basically what European cities had
Yes.
all along.
Except it's linear, right? So left and right of Wilshire, you still have the urban sprawl, but the Wilshire, because of communication, because of the metro line, because of what you can do, if you raise it up to the 4th floor or for the 6th floor or whatever, you can actually put another 1 million people. And that is really interesting. And you should ask him about it. It's possible that he gave it up, but this idea of densification through corridors, which is linear city, not something we know, right?
Yeah, here it's like...
Yeah, it's a matrix that is completely interwoven, and then there's pockets,
Well,
and this is interesting for this
We
guy.
also have medieval cities. The structure of medieval cities is not orthogonal.
No, not at all.
It's, Paris is more like a star, right? And
but there was
city
Osman,
here
right?
is
And
very
Osman.
Turkish. Right,
Yes.
Osman.
Yeah.
But
I have to
it
build
kinda
on
works.
that.
It kind of works.
I think it works better, mostly because what I've been learning from spatial neuroscience is that our cognitive map of space, so our landmarking, is not Euclidean, meaning it's
not
not
orthogonal.
Not only it's not orthogonal, it's not a single plane. So our brain works
actually
really
like that.
interestingly. The way our brain works is a connectum, meaning we have one topic and then we connect to another and connect to another. So it's more of a network organization. So, when you...
To me, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
That's exactly how I think. I never think... That's why math in me, I don't know, right? Like,
So
I
you
always...
were taught, you were
it's
taught
always
wrong
like,
math.
No,
My dear, that's
I was traumatized. I wasn't taught.
Exactly.
I was traumatized,
Exactly. That's
right?
my point.
So,
So what is
anyways,
happening with the cities is you have landmarks, and you navigate through landmarks. You don't create a Google map in your brain. You navigate through landmarks.
And also, sometimes these landmarks are personal. Not
They
necessarily,
are absolutely personal.
Not necessarily what somebody
Absolutely
designated
100%
as a
personal.
landmark.
Yeah. Absolutely 100% personal.
Let me ask you this. So, now that we've all been stuck in our houses on our social media, kind of like relearning to communicate with people and all of this, what would you like? I personally think that we do need human interaction. I think
absolutely.
we do need to interact and mix and bother each other even.
Absolutely.
Just to be human.
Absolutely.
What
So
do
when
you
you think
think
about-
we could do to maybe accelerate that, or is there something that architects, public space has been dead, for a couple of years
So there's
now.
couple of things that come to mind. So first one is, what is our strongest punishment for the offenses that we do? We put people into isolation. And long-term isolation over 2 weeks leads to hallucination. Because our brain is not made for that.
Is that why people came up with NTFs and stuff and the metaverse?
Well, yes,
Is that-
a little
is
bit,
that-
a little
yeah.
bit. Right?
I kind of think so.
So the real problem is, if you are isolated, you will start hallucinating. There's a couple of interesting social psychologists, and they will ask you a simple question like, why do you smile when you're alone in a room flipping through Facebook? That reaction does not make sense. You're not
Yeah.
signaling it to anybody, but you're actually signaling it to people that are on the photos because they live in
because
your
brain thinks it's there.
It's there.
Oh, it's picking up on those actually quite primitive impulses.
Right.
Where you're
So
just
you're
kind
still
of like-
signaling.
Yeah.
You're
So
still signaling.
It's like you're a rat and there's like a virtual rat, and then you're signaling to the virtual rat.
Absolutely. You are.
Yeah.
You are. And a lot of our reactions. So when I started researching some of that stuff is, in mathematics, you go down to a problem space, meaning you simplify it so that you can kind of study just one interaction and then you raise it up. And I ended up talking to a neuroscientist from Caltech, because his focus is on animal emotions. And I said, what is this interesting problem? And he said, you know what? Most of the stuff is predator coming into space, and the reaction is always the same. So spatially, if you put a predator, a snake, into a rat's cage, do you know what a rat is going to do?
No.
It's going to retreat into corner. That's what we do, right? So the way we relate to space comes from the architecture of the brain that we inherited from other mammals, and these are inborn. And when you analyze space, you have a completely different relationships. You have the personal, the peripersonal, the social space, but then you have some vantage points of prospect and refuge, right?
Let's go back to this
Sure.
concept of just public space.
Uh-huh.
Public space in LA, what is it? Downtown
Well, because we
LA,
live in
maybe.
cars.
Right. We live in cars. There's shopping centers, right? But people don't interact in public spaces the same way as you would on a piazza in Rome, right?
Of course.
So how do we
about
reintroduce
something
that?
about
How do
slowness.
people are so isolated that they don't even meet new people. And I think that there's this whole pandemic. I think the greater pandemic than the one we are just exiting could be a pandemic of depression. I think that's a bigger problem than getting the flu, which, I don't want to take sides or make this
I
conspiracy or anything. But I think it's like everybody
will
has
feel
it.
the consequences
We are
for
completely
years.
isolated
Yep.
psychologically also.
Yep.
How do we use space to overcome that? We are
So
architects,
when you start
right?
thinking about it, first we need to. There's a couple of things that are necessary. When you're in a car, you're invested into your next destination. You go through motions. You try not to kill anybody, right?
Yeah, but
You
it's
try
much
to-
easier. I gotta tell you, it was much easier driving in LA on a PCH than what I've just done.
Of course.
You can be on your phone. You can text people. You can
Okay,
figure
so
out
you're
music.
invested in your
right?
destination, and you're
Here,
not
not so much. You
here,
really
not so
have to
much.
focus.
Yeah, because there's a lot of
Circles,
pedestrians.
like
There's a lot of pedestrians. There's a lot of people. There's a completely different relationship to what a traffic light means.
yeah, and
Right?
I don't know if I told you or somebody else, but Malibu Barbie tried to drive a stick shift, and it didn't work.
you told- yeah.
I had to be rescued,
Yes,
literally.
yes,
So
yes,
there's a
yes.
lot going on, right? In LA, we're like extensions of our cars.
Exactly. So the point is, can you turn it around so that you're present? In order to connect, you need to be present in the present moment, in this body.
Of
Peter
course, the
Zumthor
phones,
comes to mind.
the phones
as-
and the social media is not helping this at all.
So imagine that they don't exist for a slight second.
Right.
But when you think about Zumthor, and architects are doing
yeah.
it. So Zumthor in the bath is doing these wobbly floor. So when you walk, you will have to use the stabilizing muscles, and immediately you will be embodied, right? So what we need to do is we need to slow people down, meaning this is a pedestrian area, right? So first you will leave your car and not be invested in destination. Then you actually have to walk. And then on that way,
Can we make
need
Americans
to surprise
walk?
you. We have to, right? And I think a lot of people would like to. I always think about the grannies that go walking around the shopping mall because there's nothing else, right? It's heartbreaking,
Yeah.
right? But we should,
Right.
for the sake of the social entries of the nature, right? Of the culture,
Yeah.
right? Because these, especially these accidental,
Serendipitous
serendipitous encounters. There we go, right?
Yeah, that
Would-
doesn't happen anymore.
Does not.
Who did you meet in the last year accidentally? No. Well,
I used to
people-
meet people like across the world.
Unless it's like your kids go to school and then you meet them that way,
Yeah.
or
There's three hotspots in my Santa Monica neighborhood before I moved to the mountains.
Yeah,
There was
absolutely.
a couple of hotspots, so I know when I go there, I'll meet somebody that I know. Okay,
Yeah.
but these are the nodes.
but somebody new that you haven't known.
No.
People don't mean new people.
That is true. But I was in Venice for the Biennale, and I was with my kids, and they like to sleep late, and I would wake up early and go and have coffee, really good coffee, right?
Right.
In a coffee shop, in a bar, basically. And because of the flux of people, and because there's a lot of solo travelers, I would end up talking to
Yeah.
my next.
But these are people also that are probably there for the same reasons you are.
Yeah,
you
a
know.
lot of them,
so
right?
you have a lot in common.
And then there's always something that is connecting us. I had a most wonderful conversation with a young woman that worked in the European Parliament, and it was, and she saw my bag. There was, the Biennale bag, and she said, "You know what? Where is the Arsenale? Did you see it? What did you like?" Blah, 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 blah. And an hour later, we are having this most wonderful conversation.
Wonderful.
Right?
Yeah.
And I know that I'm not going to meet her ever, but I got an email from
Baba.
her. Whoopsie. I got an email from her, and I feel that we connected. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter on what level, right?
Yeah.
But there's a shared experience, and her experience working in European Parliament and seeing it from a different perspective, and my American lack of knowledge,
Yeah.
right? Kind of jived into some conversation. So what we need to do in America is we need to slow everybody down, put them back into their bodies temporarily,
Yeah. We still
doing
occupy physical space.
doing whatever we can.
Yeah.
And that could be surprise, there could be boundaries, right? We can have a straight street, but then we can cross it with something so that you have to wake up. There can be, there's a whole lot of stuff that we can do. The question is, do we want it? Or are we driven by, our clients' wishes, which is always the expediency of spending money, right? Marginal cost equals marginal utility equals marginal cost. So there's the economic curve. How are you super efficient? And we should design efficient.
Yeah.
Well, I think efficient should not necessarily exclude surprising, delightful,
Delight.
right?
Moments of delight.
Yeah.
Whenever I talk to you, I always learn something,
Oh,
I
thank
feel. And something new or something that really kind of like opens my mind. And I don't think that's a coincidence. You've taught in many prestigious universities. We're right next to the architecture school here in Belgrade. You've taught at SciArc, UCLA. Tell me a little bit about, and I know I'm, prodding something that I want to talk about too, is education in architecture, or just educating young generations of not just architects but designers and, their place in the world. So tell me a little bit about that.
So
What
I
is
do
your
have a
sort of
little bit of a
approach?
conflicted. I have a little bit of a conflicted relationship with academia. I was in academia, then I left, then I came back, and I came back as an experienced architect. But in academic terms, I did not have all the check signs, so I came to a different position. So it ended up being an interesting journey. So seeing academia from the outside, academia does not make any sense because.
Let me ask
And
why I'm
I'm
asking you that question. You are a very artistic, artful person. I don't think that you're one of those square engineer types.
But I know a lot of engineering.
Right. You know a lot of engineering. My impression of, most of the architecture schools they're either geared toward engineering or they're artsy. My school was neither. I was more focused on the practice of architecture, which I actually appreciate. So my impression about all these schools, and I've worked with a lot of young people coming out of those schools as a licensed architect, both in my own firm and in other firms. And my opinion, as much as it will probably offend a lot of people, is that I think that a lot of these schools are doing a disservice to these young people professionally.
Yes.
People going into architecture school that want to become architects aren't doing this to, be. They're going to earn a living. First of all, doing this, so they're going to have some kind of salary or something. They're going into extreme debt, paying these elite schools $200,000, $300,000,
Yes.
which is not insignificant.
No.
Where they get an education that is very limited to, I would say,
skills and sellable
abstraction,
skills. Yeah.
theory, aesthetics. I think aesthetics are extremely important. But I don't think they leave those schools prepared to be an architect as what it would mean in the real world.
Of course
they
not.
don't know how to do technical drawings. They don't know what the phases of projects
are. Yep.
They don't know what the players are.
Nope.
They don't have even a sense of the dynamics
Yes.
of our world
Absolutely.
outside of school.
Unfortunately, you are 100% right.
I'll give you an example. These guys, they make beautiful renderings. Photoshop, graphics, which is all they're required in school. Something to sell some idea that's going to look cool.
Yep.
On the surface, and that's
on
it.
the surface.
And that's
that's the whole point. So I don't think they will.
It actually upsets me.
It is, in a way, heartbreaking, and this is why it takes about 15 years to become self-sustaining architect. Meaning not self-sustaining like you are in your office or like I had my. No. Just so that you are not dependent on your principal or somebody who is leading the project, because the skills that are taught in school are chopped up into small pieces and the whole mosaic does not come in, at least in my view. So the problem is,
so why
academia is academia about.
Why
And
are
there's-
these people in these institutes? I'm sure they're not living in a completely isolated bubble. Why are they doing this?
So that's a really good question. I don't know if they are or they're not, but I will tell you there is an economic or whatever. He is an interesting guy. The guy who wrote a Black Swan book and predicted the improbable events. So he's dealing with randomness. He's a finance guy, and I love and I kind of follow him. I don't follow many people on Twitter. He's the only one, or one of the few. And he says architects are the only discipline that work to impress other architects. You never hear of plumbers whose work is geared towards impressing other plumbers. So this, right? So this.
I'm not even friends with a lot of architects. I gotta tell you this.
For exactly those reasons.
You're one of them.
For exactly those reasons.
But I don't think that's why.
Hold on. So
Okay.
I have something to. So, academia has its own language and its own subjects.
Yeah.
And they evolve over time. So right now there's this craziness with artificial intelligence, which is completely misguided because my third master's is in computer science, right? So I kind of can write my own AI, and everybody's getting completely crazy the last couple of weeks about mid-journey, syntax-based image generation that is surprising, delightful, but useless, and all of my kind of architect friends are doing that. And this is a complete misuse of
But
architecture.
architecture, I mean,
However,
architecture isn't useless. Architecture is very much applied.
okay,
It's very
but
much,
when you have
you know,
an image of something that looks completely crazy in your next project, most of the architects will try to mimic that instead of going down to
But this is
who's my
what's-
user, what is
Uh-huh.
happening,
Yeah.
is this usable, is this
mean,
transformable, because this building is going to be here a lot longer than my lifetime, and
Right.
there will be changes, and there are daily changes because I have breakfast here, and then I have party here, and then a
Right.
whole lot of stuff happens in, let's say,
But beyond
space.
this image, I think as architects,
But we are image
have a
driven.
responsibility to not just clients, but the end user. What are their experiences going to be? How is this going to affect their life,
We have
society,
responsibility
etc., etc.?
to a project. And
No,
that is
we
cool.
don't have we have a much larger responsibility, and you
wanna
know
go
this.
you want to go in that direction.
Yeah.
No, I understand.
And
I
so
mean,
somebody leaving school, other than posting a cool photo of their project on Instagram, right? And everybody liking it in their field or their circles.
but that's a recognition. That's
But
it.
listen,
But that's completely wrong.
But yeah, right. So that's kind of what you're saying, like academia for academia's sake,
Absolutely.
right? Like, how can we go beyond that? How can we try to bestow something more onto these people? You know, like
So
how
I
can
will
we
tell you what I'm
excite
trying
them?
to do.
How can we excite them about regular people using these buildings on a daily basis, using the elevator?
So how do we introduce them
going
to a
to the
concept of
supermarket?
awe, right?
You know?
Because your life gets to be so what good art does, what good experience, what delight is this feeling of awe. And there's a lot of research now, especially in cognitive neuroscience, about what it is and why do we even have aesthetic experiences, right? You boil down aesthetic experience into a feeling of awe, right? A feeling of connectedness with universe, or a feeling. There's a lot of explanation, right? A lot of-
Yeah.
So these things can happen daily and should happen daily, and architecture should facilitate that.
Right. Like,
right?
you know,
Should facilitate that, right? Should facilitate a whole lot of things. But in the culture of Instagram and in the culture of sound bites,
but
you
also
are
academia. Let's
Okay.
go back to
okay.
academia.
So incentives for professors are actually to attract attention of other professors, no longer to create followers and legacy. And this might sound harsh, but when the studio system, the way we teach architecture, was formed, your goal was to create followers because there was enough time so that the recognition will come through their work and their appreciation. Right now,
It
in the
seems like a
culture,
very closed system, and it
well,
seems a little
so
bit.
you have Rainer Bartram writing about in the late 80s, no, early 80s, maybe even earlier. Okay, that's something that I should check. About the whole collapse of studio system. What is happening
I had
right now in
studio too.
nearly all the schools? There's always a scandal. SIRC has a huge scandal,
Oh,
huge. Tom
What is this
Wiscombe.
scan- what happened?
So it's about free labor.
Oh,
So students
Work
apparently
for-
worked for a professor
without
for,
pay.
without pay,
just for
as
the
a studio
experience.
project. Yes.
Oh, that's kind of similar to the concept of architectural competitions, where developers
exactly.
will issue a competition,
Yes.
and then all
And
these
now
architects
Bartlett is having the same thing.
work for free. They get
Exactly.
free ideas.
Yes.
you
Yes.
know.
Yes. And this is why nobody's. So when I was in architecture, the career path was you do competition. Our friend Hetzel is one of those guys who was really successful, and he was early.
But he
He's
does
my
concepts.
age.
Yeah.
Okay, he's
Yeah.
my age, so he caught on that wave.
Yeah.
That wave died, and right now we are having scandals. Last week, Bartlett, right? Exactly the same scandal.
I'm not familiar, but I
the UCL,
presume
right.
students were working for free or something
Yeah,
on the project.
So the whole gamut, right? So there is unrest in the student bodies on multiple subjects, on subjects of how come there are no more women included into history of architecture? That's a good question, right? What about minorities? How come we are not covering my goddamn Yemen, right?
Yeah.
Right? Those
Well,
pictures.
they're trying to, I think, artificially also.
So that's another question, right? What is the right way? How do we project that? What are really sellable skills?
Actually, let's talk about that. So you're a woman architect, I'm a woman architect. I've never really, I don't know if I was a man architect, whether I would be more successful or not. I've never really delved into
I
that.
will probably have a lot more time dedicated to my profession that I had with my 2 kids. Because I was there on every goddamn doctor's appointment, through every cold. Not to say that I didn't have help.
But I mean, look at you. You're a powerhouse,
Well, yeah, but I don't think that I'm in the place in my career where I could have been. The question is completely arbitrary. And remember the whole lean in Sheryl Sandberg?
Yeah.
It kind of imploded right now because she quit everything and said, I need to focus on my teenage kids that are crazy and they need me, and forget about leaning in, because the concept of quality time versus time, it's actually irreplaceable. It's time, right?
Time is time.
Time is time, right?
Yeah.
So there's people that will tell you, oh my God, there was a Harvard Business Review article saying, if you want to be successful in a career, don't get married, or something along those lines. It's like, okay, so that's a harsh
so unfair.
reality.
It is unfair. I don't think
And
it's
it's
even
super
realistic because
No.
you can't not get married. You have
You
this one
can, but
experience.
the question is, what are the trade-offs?
You can get divorced.
There we go, right? Right? So there's a lot of stuff that you can do.
Yeah.
But the question is, what are the trade-offs? And I kind of this
Let's talk
spring
about
I
this.
talked
Let's talk about this.
Let's give this up, because I talked to a very, very successful Koning Eisenberg. So I talked to her, and she said she had a 6-month-old when she got a Harvard teaching job, and she was Boston 4 weeks or Boston 2 weeks, then back. But
That's
then
crazy, yeah.
it is crazy.
It is crazy. But
It
when
is crazy.
you're younger also, you think you can do all these things.
Of course.
It
Yeah.
has some...
Yeah. And then
What
the
I wanted to
resentment
say,
sets in.
actually, I think that's maybe even more important than gender. I think is this idea of designing your life.
Well, yeah. And it evolves as you get older. So let's stop there, right? No, let me tell you what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
Because I think that we have to combat this relatively superficial approach to architecture with some real data. Can we have some data to show us stuff? So I will tell you that 80s and 90s architects, and they're saying postmodernism, actually happened because of development of environmental psychology. So the first experiments in environmental psychology started 60s, 70s. By the time it seeped into architecture, it was 80s and 90s. Postmodernism, understanding that we all feel uneasy in crowded situation, that if you lift the ceiling up, you will have less crowding, that men are especially feeling complicated in crowded situation.
Right,
So
because
you do
women
control-
are evolutionary more
Close-knit,
okay with
close-knit
packs.
and
Yeah, we're like...
So
yeah.
there's this whole lot of different stuff, right? And I think we are becoming aware that we are seriously harming the environment with our style of buildings, but we are not really aware that we are harming ourselves with what we do, not just materials, but what we do in terms of how we design buildings. So the super blue light, 6,000 kelvins, right?
Yeah.
It signals our melatonin production in the brain to tell it it's noon, so you should delay sleep. So if you work till
Blue light.
blue light, right?
Right.
So now we have filters on all
you
the
have
blue lights,
glasses also,
and
blue light
glasses and a
glasses.
whole lot of stuff. But we are kind of slowly starting to. Now, what happened this whole, well, you said Gestalt, right? So there's a lot of Gestalt in the 90s, and the generation that was teaching me, especially in LA, which is Tom, and a whole lot of people came out of being friends with Frank Gehry, including Coy Howard, who was one of my teachers. He's a full Gestalt guy. But in the meantime, spatial neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience developed. And they don't look only at what I would call software, which is how, you don't know the matrix, but you're just looking at what actually kind of perspires between people, what is happening. Now, neuroscience can actually give you the background, look at both hardware, what is the connectome, how are we related, is it Euclidean map, how do we project things, and the software. And we know a lot more. And not only that we know a lot more, we can measure a lot more. So if we can measure, then we can see. Now, what is happening in technology is this whole user-centered focus. From Google saying we are user-centered to nearly every goddamn startup saying we are user-centered. So that's customization.
Do you think that's real, or do you think that's just a catchphrase?
I think it is real, right? Because when you look at your Netflix and I look at my Netflix, they're very different, right? They're absolutely customized.
Mine has a lot of Last Kingdom on it.
It's embarrassing to admit, but I'm addicted to Star Trek and Picard.
Oh, Star Trek.
Oh my God. It's okay. So, hey.
No, you're right. But I gotta tell you, the whole user-centric, I think you're saying it is very sophisticated. It's so sophisticated, but I get a lot of errors, like on my Instagram.
Of course. Hey.
On my Instagram, where it's about design. I don't know. It's not personal. It's like for architecture. I'm getting a lot of like Kurdish weddings somehow. So I don't know if it's this whole Dubai trip or whatever, but like there's an error there. I'm totally not that demographic, but I know where I could get the dress. I know where I could get the big blonde hair. Like I know where I can get the golden bangles.
Okay, you will tell me all of these because these are important data points. It's all fed to me
as if I'm planning a Kurdish wedding, but I'm not.
Honestly, I want you to share some of that info because I like their jewelry.
It's very interesting, but
okay.
Just throwing it in there.
So we will.
It's very sophisticated now.
So it comes to mind. So there are two guys who wrote the book on artificial intelligence. They're called Russell and Norvig. And Russell's. So this is a textbook, Artificial Intelligence: The Modern Approach, 5th, 7th generation. We all learned artificial intelligence on all the classes, Stanford, USC, where I was a student, everywhere. That's the book. So you cover certain approaches.
So tell me, what is your focus and what are you doing with AI?
So what I want to do is I want to extract that data that is about evaluation of space. Because we as architects do not agree. Well, we kind of agree that this is a good building. But we cannot measure it. I don't think we necessarily have to measure that this is a 3+ and this is 4+, or this is 5+ or 7+, but we need to be able to put language to the experience. And I think that our measure is a user, or the emotions that we, like art, Jeff Koons will say, I don't know what art is, I know that it does something in you. So I think architecture does something in you. I'm good enough with that, right? And I think we can capture that.
I think that's great. Do you think that before we capture that, do you think that we need to? I think there's always been this burden on architects to educate everybody on the project, or like the teachers, the who's, like whatever. About the process or about the significance of the space. Do you think that we need to do the work before, or is this also a tool to educate others?
So I actually have two answers, and one would be, I am of the opinion that architects should start to speak Latin, just like doctors. The reason is we are really not respected. We are not listened to.
But do you think that would make us even
actually, a lot of people tried. Think about, what's the name? Dear God, he was a dean of SCI-Arc for a zillion years. Eric Moss. When Eric Moss starts to speak, you need kind of 3 minutes to just translate it to regular English, and it doesn't
But
work.
don't you think that that is actually
This is a defense
separating
mechanism. That is
all of us
that's a
from
defense
what's-
mechanism, and I'm maybe being very sarcastic in this one.
No, but I totally get what you're saying. Like, I think a lot, especially academic speak,
Academic
is like,
speak, yes.
right? It's like, it's meant to be like, make it so, why can't it just be like, oh, this door, why don't we put the door here? Because that's what all the other people on the project are going to be
Yes,
talking like.
yes.
And in the end, the person experiencing it is not going to have a master's in architecture.
No, not
and won't be
definitely.
thinking about your,
Right.
like, whatever concept you had going on, like, at 3
to
a.m.
impress
Like,
other
you know what I
architects.
mean? Like,
To impress other architects, right?
like, why can't we bridge them? Why can't
So we need
all
Shakespeare.
speak the same language?
We need Shakespeare, right? We need somebody who's Shakespearean, or at least has a Shakespearean inclination to provide, not populistic so that, you know, if you want gold, it's going to be gold, but provide Shakespeare, right?
Right.
So this is what we need. This is what we need to install.
Right.
The other part is,
I mean, as
can
you know,
we measure it?
Yeah, as you know, a lot of my courses are specifically that, like trying
Yes.
to put it in very simple language, what we do as architects, who we are as architects,
Yes.
what are the main elements,
Yes.
what is the timeline,
Exactly.
so that everybody can understand it before we get into a million,
here's the-
10 million, 20
Yes.
million project, right?
So what they're saying is, so generation of architects older than me says that I was trying to bring VR for last 7 years. I got my first VR set 7 years ago. So for 7 years I'm trying to bring VR into architecture. And there's a lot of resistance, especially with the designers. Because when you see it, it stops being design, it becomes politics. Now
That's very interesting.
everybody has an opinion on the door, but not everybody is a systems thinker. Because when you move this door, you need to move the header, and the header will need to move da 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 da.
And everybody will have an opinion also
Oh no,
about
absolutely.
it.
Everybody already does,
Right.
except you get them late, and the door is there, and there's nothing to do. So if you see it in VR, and if you can click,
Right.
click, click, and change, it becomes politics. I still think that there's a way around it,
So it's
and
also
I
a
still think we
problem-solving
need.
device.
I still think we need a Shakespearean approach. So let's do a little bit of everything. Let's, instead of obfuscation, that is defensive mechanism, or Latin or whatever else, how about we bring in some actual qualities? If we can measure them and show them, what we can measure is visible. If you don't have language for it, if it doesn't exist in language, I know it's kind of scary, but if it doesn't exist in language, it doesn't exist.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you cannot measure, then whatever, right?
That's very interesting.
So my focus last couple of years is try to, first figure out what is the discipline's approach. What do we value? And then I realized, there's academic view and there's the user view. There's a
there's the
really interesting
developer view.
pull-up. And then there's developer view. And then there's
ethics also, which
and
we've
there is
started talking
ethics.
about, but didn't really.
And there's ethics, especially talking about Belgrade and the new city being inserted into a newer city, into an older city, into everything else. At the end,
What is our
life takes-
responsibility?
What is our responsibility? But at the end, so
What is our legacy?
oh my God, that's a big
I
one,
mean,
right?
Shakespeare has a great legacy because his whole message is very timeless. We're sitting here in a, I didn't mention this at the beginning, but our hotel, Metropole, is a very classical, not
Yep.
classical, but modernist classical
Yep.
place, designed by a modernist architect.
Yep.
We have those in LA as well.
Yes.
I mean, they kind of had a legacy. They did something new. They did something important. They did something that's still relevant. We're sitting here. We're still enjoying this. This is
yeah.
the same building. We're
Yep.
still enjoying it.
So the one of the qualities of this building is that it was transformable. Right? There's something about designing, especially structural design, so that you can transform it. And you're seeing the first iteration, the second iteration, maybe even third. I don't know how far it should go. This is not chess, right? We don't have 100 iterations, but we should have a few.
Right.
And you can see that I can fix it. So comes to mind, what's his name? Dutch architect that never finishes the building and lets the family domesticate it. God.
That's interesting.
Oh my God, I forgot. Okay, anyways,
You
the
take
modernist
out the
approach, right.
ego also, which
You
I
take
think
out
for
the
architects
ego. Oh my
is
God, that
a little difficult,
hurts.
right?
That really hurts. But it also removes you from your next job because you're going to be recognized by that goddamn image that showed up on
Yeah, that's
whatever, somebody's
we should look him
Instagram
up.
and
We should
somebody.
Google him afterwards.
Right.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Herzberger. Herman Herzberger is he's
See,
still alive.
I do learn something
Yeah.
new.
Thank you. So, anyways, Herzberger does not finish. He gives like 2 options for plumbing, and then you can put the bedrooms and the bathrooms
Yeah.
there, but you can also put the kitchen.
But that's what we all do.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it's transformable.
Because in the
right?
next, 50
Iteration,
years, somebody will put a different carpet
Exactly.
that I might not even like.
Well, so
And that's
the idea
okay.
of the idea about space being transformable should be taught earlier.
Yeah,
We don't teach that.
yeah, yeah.
The responsibility of an architect to oversee building end to end, again going back to care, is you actually coordinate where the plumbing goes, where the electrical goes,
Right.
where the structure goes.
Yeah.
You have to coordinate that.
Yeah.
And you have to tell them, well, now it's no longer transformable, right? And transformable is an added quality.
Yeah.
So all of these things.
I love
But
that. Yeah.
but the idea, my focus will be, can I measure it? So if I can show it in something that is measurable and put it into language, we have a platform to talk about. It is maybe a crazy task, right? Not really understandable, but I think we need it. And I think it would be the job of academia to establish a platform so that we can measure against something, right? I don't mean it in adversarial terms, but we need to have some sort of guides. We should not be a discipline that designs for other architects.
I love that. So we're going to wrap up.
Sure.
What are some final thoughts? I do want to bring it back. You're a very artful person. You
So
just came
what
back
I want to
from...
ask you is,
You
Curtis
just
Jewelry,
Oh, the Curtis Jewelry.
what are the sources? I buy Indian,
I'll hook
you
you
know.
up. I'll totally hook you up.
I buy Indian jewelry, right?
But before that, you just came back from the Venice Biennale.
Oh, yes.
You're a very artful person.
Yes.
What inspires you?
Well, first of all, the official selection was a lot more global, a lot more about, well, in my personal view, domesticity in women, a lot more about body, because you enter a body relationship to all the artworks. It's completely different than, flat painting or something. These are all these. So one of the really inspiring pieces of art is this rammed earth labyrinth that actually has a sensory part. So the earth is mixed with cinnamon and clove and tapioca. It has a baby powder something smell. It is body size, so you're slightly entombed. It's black, brownish, and it smells. So it's a completely architectural piece, right?
It is.
It is totally
but also all
architectural piece.
factory, right?
All factory,
Which
yes.
is like what we kind
Unbelievable.
of started with.
Yes, exactly. And
With
there's
food.
a couple of
Yeah.
really interesting pieces. Of course, there's Barbara Kruger, which is kind of really interesting to see, a U.S. something from U.S. selection. And what she's doing is, non-linear text. So she takes 3 canonic texts, the Last Will and Testament, and then she plays in a style of Duchamp. Duchamp would write above and below words that would kind of incongruency create a vibrato of a meaning around the concept. So she does it in a way of just replacing that word until you get it in a video work. It's kind of powerful. There's a lot more embroidery. There's a lot more global artists present. There is... I really love this one, right? So it was not a white man's selection. This is different.
Oh, so it wasn't a bunch of old men. Good. I'm so glad.
Yeah,
That's cool.
No, it is interesting,
That's
right?
great.
Depends from, like, I was just talking to my friend Tanya this whole morning, and she had a work that I think was incredibly powerful. So when I saw a Serbian pavilion, I said, oh, they rip you off. She says, no, 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 he's my relative. We're fine. So her work was called Position. So she was at the bottom of a pool filming people in different stages of rehabilitation that have some sort of body handicap swimming above her from a position of, in a way, being suffocated. She's at the bottom of a pool. You feel it. You know that there's no breathing. And the light comes through, and you don't immediately notice that there's something wrong because we all have some sort of handicaps, and not all of them visible. All of us, we all do, right? And it's amazingly powerful work. What is currently there is, it's about bodies of water, which is kind of interesting, but I don't know. So the one work is the third wall or the fifth wall. It's kind of interesting. Is a projection of an ocean that is not looped but simulated. So it's kind of interesting. So you enter a room, but there's a beach suddenly there. But the other one is this swimmer, probably a water polo swimmer, because you see how water polo players. So just going loops across the swimming pool, but from a God perspective. So I was thinking how the men's approach, the God perspective, swimming, very clean, and Tanya's work that I just spent all morning talking about is this feminine view of a handicap,
empathetic.
of being a lot more empathetic.
Yeah.
Right. So what I'm seeing in this Biennale is a lot more messy feelings, messy, lifelike approaches to art, which is what we need today, right? Don't give me the clean, don't give me that. That's what Instagram is for. I want messy. I want vibrant.
Real.
And this, I think, is
wonderful.
I mean, of course, it's uneven. There's a whole lot of interesting stuff. There's a lot of technology. There's a whole lot of, but great way to spend 2 days or 3 days.
Wonderful. I'm so glad that we've spent this hour plus. I know we could probably go forever.
I know.
But we'll do this again.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah, and we'll continue. Thank you so much.
Oh my God, thank you.
Thank you. I love you.
Love you. Thank you. This was fabulous.
Awesome.
A great way to spend an hour plus. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Now we can eat.
Now we can do stuff, right? This was fantastic. Okay.